Welcome to Glenn Pinta's world. This is a special place in many ways. It's a place where the Virginian Railway continues to haul long strings of coal hoppers behind massive articulated steam locomotives. It's a place where you can still find purple Atlantic Coastline F units racing south with a sleek train of silver passenger cars. And it's a place where Fairbanks Morse trainmasters roar down the main with fast freights in tow. But Glenn's world is much more than trains. As you'll find out, peculiar as it may seem with the sounds and sights before you, this is a place for healing. A place to escape the mental anguish associated with a life-threatening illness. You'll learn more about that later, but first, we'll have Glenn explain how he became involved in O-gauge railroading and his passion for the Virginian Railway. We're curious how a kid from Chicago developed such an interest in a relatively small, far-off coal hauler located in the mountains of West Virginia and Virginia.
1956. That's when my parents bought me my first Lionel train. Me and my brother studied for months and months looking at that catalog, and he wanted the Seaboard 601 switcher, and I wanted the big two-motored long Virginian trainmaster. And my parents argued over the fact that my dad was going to spend 1 week's salary on trains, and my mother was quite upset, but we came out of the wholesaler shop with 2 train sets, and I had my Virginian. In '59, they came out with a rectifier and also a caboose. Couldn't find the rectifier, but my parents bought me the caboose, which is now a pretty big collector's item right now. I've got the original box that came in from Marshall Fields. And ever since then, I've always was a Virginian Railroad fan. As Lionel came out with more and more rolling stock engines and cabooses, I kept on buying more Virginian, and that became my railroad. And as you can see, most of the railroad out there is Virginian.
As with many of us, there were years Glenn did not participate in the hobby, even though he was savvy enough not to sell or give away his childhood Lionel trains. But one day, his interest was rekindled by a sight he'd almost forgotten.
It was 1978. I happened to visit a hobby shop for some reason, and I saw Lionel was making trains again. And I saw the same Trainmaster, FM Trainmaster that I had as a kid, being reissued. And I said, wow, I got to try that out. I got to have one. And I got involved. And as I got involved, my older brother got back into Lionel, repairing Lionel, swapping, selling Lionel. Lionel was his whole life for a long time. And it touched him, and again, it touched me, it touched my younger brother, and it also touched my nephew. Finally, after all the different layouts that I've had, we decided to move, have a house built for us here. And during construction, I wanted to make sure none of the wood that I was going to bring in damaged any of the walls. So during pre-construction, before drywall was upstairs, I had all the plywood and 2x4s that I needed to build this layout dropped down into here. And it was after the house was built that my brothers and myself came here and started working on the bench work, and we completed the bench work that first year after I moved into the house. And we actually had one layer of track going around the outside of the boards, and we'd run trains once in a while. My daughter was born, and she'd have fun watching me as a 1-year-old running the trains down here, but I never did anything with it until I was diagnosed with colon cancer. That year was 1990.
Many of us have experienced a year in our lives we'd rather forget, or at least certainly not live over again. For Glenn, it was that fateful diagnosis in 1990. That's when his life was shattered by fighting 2 bouts with cancer, undergoing both chemo and radiation therapy, and in having 2 major surgeries. Needless to say, his railroading came to a complete halt that year, but then something very special happened.
December 1990, I finished everything, all chemo, everything related to any of my cancers, and I've been cancer-free and without any symptoms for 14 years now. That was in December of 1990. So I'm officially cured. But it wasn't until that year of finishing up that chemo and the radiation and having all the surgeries and everything done, that's when they tell you, well, come back in 6 months for your x-rays and have a good time. And that's when it starts hitting you. It was like traumatic shock syndrome for me. I found I was worried about my cancer coming back. Was it going to come back? Was it not going to come back? What was happening in my life? And I found I could come down to the basement and tinker down here and forget I was ever sick. Those 3 to 4 hours I'd spend down here a night freed my mind up completely of ever even being sick. It was like I never was sick. And it gave my mind the rest it needed to get cured from what I was dealing with. And so for the next umpteen years, I've come down here and worked on building this layout. And it's helped me deal with the fact of actually fighting cancer and beating cancer and being cured from cancer by building this layout. It was the best medicine I could have taken. It was better than any of the chemo, radiation, or anything. Just using my mind to forget about being sick for those many hours a day helped me so much more.
The railroad fills up about 2/3 of the basement, a good-sized area. Like so many in this hobby, the layout's never quite finished.
It's about 26 by 22 feet. It varies because I get a control panel in the middle. I have changed things from time to time, tore things and ripped things up and then redid things. You'll notice today that the control panel has been torn up. As we say, we try to do new things or our layouts are never ever finished. Well, last spring I decided to tear up my control panel and rebuild it, and I'm in the process now. It should be all together by sometime this Christmas. I usually have things going pretty good.
One of the first things you notice when viewing the layout is its size and the fact that inner portions cannot be reached from the aisles. We wondered how Glenn gets in there to work on or to re-rail equipment.
My younger brother is a pretty heavy-set guy, and he helped me build the benchwork for this layout, and I wanted a benchwork that we could both get up on top of the layout to work, because as you notice, it has access going around it completely, but in order to get to most of the railroad, you actually have to stand on the table, and we're able to do that because of the benchwork underneath it is very strong. The mountain that's in the middle is central. There is a cutout in the middle underneath the table that you can come up underneath that mountain and get anything that's derailed or any problems with that trackage is actually accessible inside the mountain. But otherwise, you can jump up and down on that table, nothing's going to cave in.
The entire layout is made up of 9 loops of track. The 2 outside loops on the lower level are where Glenn likes to run his big steam. Next is an inside loop that folds over itself and is where we've been doing the onboard shots. These 3 loops are interconnected via sidings and switches. The elevated track up on the black bridges is one of those sidings. The isolated innermost loop on the lower level runs around the base of the mountain. On the upper level, there are 4 more tracks, with the innermost loop used as a streetcar line through town. Of the other 3 loops, 2 are at tabletop level, and the 3rd is an elevated line between them. This is where the ACL-Fs and the Erie FAs are running. The outermost loop is interconnected to the folded loop on the lower level via the track on the right. At the very bottom of the screen is the 9th loop. This small oval can be isolated from the rest of the layout, and it's a great place for young children to learn how to operate trains. As with many O-gaugers, Glenn has his favorite locomotive.
What I like running best is the Lionel Virginian 900 Allegheny. It's 32 inches long. It was Lionel's first 2-engine steam engine, articulate engine that they ever came out and produced, and it runs like a terror. and it pulls 35, 40 hopper cars without any problems, and I run it on the outside layout, the biggest layout. It takes the most room, and it's probably the most fun to run. You can put your hand down next to a switch, and you can feel that weight, that 25 or 30 pounds going through the switches at a fairly good clip. It's a lot of power. It's a lot of fun running that engine. Atlantic Coastline passenger engines I've got through. I gave that to my daughter. She likes trains. Even at 15, I find her and her girlfriends. And the boys, the boys coming down here and playing with the trains.
Although he admits to being a collector, Glenn's not about to put his prized possessions up on a shelf only to be admired.
I am a collector. I do have some pieces out there that are probably worth a lot of money, and I do run them. And yeah, I've had nicks and scratches on a few items, but I've got some real nice pieces, but I also run those pieces. It's a lot more fun running them than constantly dusting them on a shelf.
His fascination with that yellow and blue Fairbanks Morse Trainmaster in the 1956 Lionel catalog led to Glenn developing a lifelong interest in a railroad he never witnessed in operation.
I've tried to model this as much as I could through the Virginian Railway. I've got a lot of books on the Virginian. I've studied the railroad, their different buildings and stations, and I've tried to color them the same as what Virginian had colored theirs.
Other buildings on the layout reflect bits and pieces of Glenn's life.
Started my own filter company. Of course, I had to have a model of the company. And I've got a couple of other models. We do sell filters. We're involved in building engineers downtown. So there's a union hall there representing Local 399 building engineers. I had to have them. And of course, a liquor store, Brewski's Liquors, a White Castle. The Pace Hotel is out of a hotel where I went to Western Illinois University. There was a hotel there called the Pace Hotel that had a bar that we spent a lot of our time, college time, in that hotel. Fireworks factory, there was an explosion years ago and blew out the side of the fireworks factory.
Many of the accessories on the layout are operational, and we watch as Virginian Malley 741 slowly pulls up to the tank to take on water. Things are getting a bit dizzy in the yard tower. No wonder the tracks are plugged full of cars with nothing moving. Over at the intermodal ramp, we watch a MyJack translift unload a piggyback trailer. And then there are the time-honored and traditional accessories. The milk car is always fun to watch and is a great piece for the kids to operate. Here's a Lionel lift truck unloading wood timbers from a flat car. And this is another traditional favorite, the vibrating cattle car and trackside corral. It's a pleasure watching this crane as it swings around to unload scrap metal. In Glenn's world, the sun always shines, and there's always a train coming down the line. It's obvious he feels his involvement in O-gauge railroading helped heal his body and his spirit. He has some good advice for anyone undergoing health issues or simply experiencing the stress of everyday living.
This hobby to me is a very important hobby, and I tell that to anybody dealing with sicknesses to find themselves a hobby, something they can enjoy. Summertime I like to garden. Wintertime I have my trains, but I think it's very important with every disease or whatever's going on in your life that people have a hobby. And it's a way to just relieve all your stress, anxieties, all the frustrations of having a day or doing whatever you do, and feeling better, and it makes yourself better. It makes you feel better. I think it's healthier for most people. This hobby to me is really important.